The scream tore through the dense canopy of Blackwater Forest, startling a flock of birds into frantic flight. Emma Pierce, just 5 years old, froze as the thick, cold coils of a massive Burmese python slithered past her ankle. Her breath hitched, heart pounding, as her wide blue eyes darted through the trees and through the branches. She saw him, her father. Richard Pierce, walking away. Not running, just walking. His expensive Italian shoes barely scuffed by the dirt path. He didn't turn back, not once. He knew exactly what he was leaving behind. 6 hours. That's how long a child Emma's size might survive in Blackwater Forest less, if fear overtook her. But Richard Pierce wasn't afraid. He was already at the edge of the forest, calmly wiping his fingerprints off the polished face of his $30,000 Rolex, then slipping it into the pocket of his tailored jacket. His expression was cool, calculated. A man trained to stay composed while firing employees or closing 8-figure deals. This is a necessary sacrifice, he muttered to himself, echoing the same cold mantra he'd used to climb to the top of Pierce Investments, the same ruthless logic that had crushed rivals in boardrooms, now turned against a 5-year-old child. His child. Emma. The mistake left behind by a woman who had the nerve to die of cancer, leaving him saddled with a daughter he never wanted. Back in the forest, Emma pressed herself against the bark of a gnarled oak. Her pigtails were unraveling, her pink sneakers caked in mud. Tears mixed with sweat as the massive python's amber eyes locked onto her trembling form. It slithered, closer 18 feet of silent, coiled death. And then a flash of black and tan fur exploded from the underbrush. Max. A German shepherd with battle scars on his muzzle and fire in his eyes. He planted himself between Emma and the snake, barking with feral intensity. His body was tense, ready, protective. But even Max had a limit. Hours earlier, he'd been bitten while defending Emma from a smaller snake. Venom was already coursing through his bloodstream. Mason Carter, the man who had rescued Max from a war zone, knew the signs. Max had 4, maybe 5 hours left, and yet here he was, choosing to fight anyway. 200 yards away, Mason Carter froze. He just heard Max's bark, the sharp, urgent one he only used for real danger. The former Army Ranger dropped the firewood from his arms and ran. Not like a civilian, not like a hiker, like a soldier. Fast, silent, deadly. Meanwhile, Richard reached his Range Rover half a mile away on a service road. The forest was already behind him. In the city, champagne was chilling. His girlfriend, Victoria Montgomery, would be waiting at the penthouse. She was beautiful, ambitious, and had no love for children. They'd toast to their freedom, a future without the burden of a daughter who reminded him too much of the wife who died loving him. But Emma remembered. That wife, her mother, Sarah. She remembered her warm voice, her songs, her laughter. She remembered their home in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a cozy bungalow filled with the scent of blueberry pancakes and the sound of her grandmother's humming. Grace Sullivan, Sarah's mother, had taken Emma in after the funeral. The old woman's body was fragile now, worn down by age and arthritis. But her love? That was unbreakable. Every Saturday, Emma would ask the same question, "Is Daddy coming today?" And every Saturday, Grace would give the same gentle answer, "Your daddy's a very busy man, Emma Bean. He runs a big company, but he loves you." A lie. But a kinder one than the truth, because the truth was, Richard had only visited twice in 7 months, once to check a box. The second time, to bring Victoria, who looked at Emma's crayon drawings like they were stains. That was when Grace had made a quiet decision. Emma didn't need Richard's money. She needed love. And Grace, even with aching joints and limited savings, would give her that. But Richard had made a decision of his own. In his 38th floor office, Victoria leaned over his desk with her signature cold smile. "She's just an old woman," she said. "You want custody of Emma? Then make the old woman unavailable." "What are you suggesting?" Richard asked. "Nothing permanent," she replied. "Just something that makes her unfit for now. You take the girl, we make it look clean." So, Richard made the call. "Grace, I want to take Emma for the weekend," he said smoothly. "Some bonding, maybe a little camping trip." Grace hesitated. "You? Camping? People change." He even invoked Sarah's name. "She'd want this," he said, "for Emma and me." And so Grace packed Emma's little backpack, hugged her, kissed her, whispered a prayer. She had no idea it might be the last time she'd ever see her granddaughter alive. Back in the forest, the storm broke. Rain fell in heavy sheets as Max lunged at the snake, biting, snarling, protecting. Python struck back, coiling around the dog's body. Max yelped. But still, he didn't back down. Then a gunshot. The python hissed and recoiled. Mason Carter had arrived. He fired again, this time piercing the snake's skull. The massive body convulsed once. Then still. Emma collapsed into Mason's arms. Sobbing. Max whimpered, exhausted but alive. "You're safe now," Mason whispered, his voice thick with emotion. 3 days later, Richard Pierce was arrested at his penthouse, still wearing the same watch he'd tried to hide. The investigation, fueled by Mason's report and Grace's testimony, exposed everything: the forged camping permits, the false statements, and eventually Victoria's involvement in the sinister plot. Richard's downfall was swift. Emma never saw him again. 1 year later, a small ceremony was held at the Oak Ridge Town Square. A bronze statue of a German Shepherd was unveiled, honoring Max, the dog who stood between a child and certain death. Emma, now 6, placed a single flower at the statue's base and whispered, "Thank you." Beside her, Grace stood tall, her hand resting gently on Emma's shoulder, and not far away, in the shade of a magnolia tree, Mason Carter watched with quiet pride, his faithful companion by his side, tail wagging, eyes bright. And that, dear listener, is the true story of betrayal, survival, and the fierce loyalty of a dog who refused to let evil win. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us what city you're watching from. And remember, not all heroes walk on 2 legs. Stomach. Through the window, she watched Emma pretending to throw a stick for her imaginary dog and made a decision. First thing tomorrow, she'd visit the animal shelter. If Richard was finally stepping up as a father, perhaps she could finally fulfill Emma's wish for a real dog. The Oak Ridge Animal Shelter smelled off disinfectant and wet fur as Grace followed the young volunteer past rows of kennels. Barks echoed off concrete walls, but one dog remained silent, watching them with intelligent eyes. "This is Max," the volunteer explained, stopping at the last kennel. A German Shepherd about 5 years old. He was a trained search and rescue dog before. His handler died. He's been here 3 months. Most people want puppies, not adult dogs, with his intensity. Grace studied the magnificent animal. His black and tan coat gleamed despite shelter conditions, and his posture conveyed a dignified patience. When he met Grace's eyes, she felt an uncanny awareness in his gaze. "He's perfect," Grace said softly. "May I bring my granddaughter to meet him tomorrow?" The next day, Emma's squeal of delight upon seeing Max echoed through Feshelter. To everyone's surprise, the normally reserved shepherd immediately approached the little girl, gently sniffing her outstretched hand before allowing her to stroke his head. "He smells like Mommy," Emma whispered, burying her face in Max's fur. Gracie exchanged confused glances with the shelter worker. Her mother used a special lavender soap, Grace explained, though the coincidence unsettled her. Sarah had indeed used lavender everything, a detail Emma's 5-year-old memory had somehow preserved. It's almost like they know each other, the worker observed as Max patiently allowed Emma to examine his paws, tail, and ears with the thorough curiosity only a child could muster. "Can we keep him, Grandma?" "Please," Emma begged, arms wrapped around the shepherd's thick neck. Max's eyes fixed on Grace seemed to ask the same question. By Thursday evening, Max had become an inseparable part of their small family. He slept outside Emma's door, followed her everywhere, and showed a protective instinct that both comforted and surprised Grace. When Richard's Range Rover pulled into the driveway Friday morning, Max's behavior changed instantly. His hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Hush now." Grace scolded, though the dog's reaction intensified her own misgivings. "That's Emma's father." Emma, excited about her first camping trip, barely noticed the tension as she hugged Grace goodbye. "I'll tell Daddy all about Max when we get back." As Richard loaded Emma's small pink backpack into his vehicle, his gaze fell on the German shepherd watching from the porch, the animal's posture rigid with alertness. "New dog?" he asked Grace, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "Emma's been wanting one," Grace replied. "His name is Max. He's a former rescue dog." Something in Richard's expression shifted, a momentary calculation that sent a chill down Grace's spine. Rescue dog. Interesting timing. As the Range Rover disappeared down the tree-lined street, Max's whine turned into an urgent bark. He pawed at the door, his distress evident. "They'll be back Sunday evening," Grace assured the dog, though her own heart felt heavy with a nameless dread. "Emma will be fine with her daddy." But as the day progressed, Max's anxiety increased. By afternoon, he was frantically circling the house, pausing occasionally to stare toward Blackwater Forest with such intense focus that Grace found herself reaching for the phone, then stopping. What would she say? That her dog had a bad feeling, that Richard Pierce, CEO and community leader, shouldn't be trusted with his own daughter because a German shepherd was acting strange. Grace Sullivan had lived long enough to recognize the stirrings of genuine fear, and as the afternoon sun began its descent toward evening, she made a decision. Reaching for her phone, she called the one person in Oakridge who knew Blackwater Forest better than anyone. "John Reynolds, it's Grace Sullivan. I need your help." And it might sound crazy, but I think Emma might be in danger. Mason Carter crashed through the underbrush with the practiced silence of a man who had spent years in combat zones where noise meant death. The first floor absorbed his footfalls as he moved toward Max's urgent barking. 20 yards ahead, the foliage parted to reveal a scene from a nightmare. His German shepherd standing defensively bore a tiny blonde girl, facing off against one of the largest Burmazephathons Mason had ever encountered in these woods. "Don't move, little one," Mason called softly, his voice pitched to carry without, startling either the child or the snake. "Max has got you. I'm coming." The python's massive head swayed hypnotically, its primitive brain calculating the threat posed by the dog. Its muscular body, thick as Mason's thigh, tensed in preparation to strike. Max, understanding the immediate danger, kept his body between the snake and the child, his teeth bared in a snarl that would have sent most predators retreating. But pythons weren't most predators. Mason assessed the situation with the cool detachment that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. Snake was too large for Max to handle alone. The girl was too paralyzed with fear to run. Direct intervention was the only option. In one fluid motion, Mason unslung the walking staff from his back, a 6-foot length of hickory polished smooth by years of use. As the python lunged toward Max, Mason brought the staff down hard against the snake's midsection, deflecting its strike. "Back away," he commanded the dog, who instantly obeyed, moving backward with the girl. The python, momentarily confused by the intervention, recoiled and reassessed. Mason stood his ground, staff held horizontally before him, man and reptile locked. In an ancient standoff, when I move, you run. Mason instructed the child without taking his eyes off the snake. "Max will guide you. Follow him." Emma nodded, her small face white with terror, hands clutching Max's fur. Mason feinted left, then swung. The staff in a wide arc that caught the python's head, momentarily disorienting it. "Now," he shouted. Max understood immediately, grabbing the sleeve of Emma's jacket in his gentle mouth and pulling her away from danger. The child stumbled into motion, her trust in the dog overriding her paralyzing fear. The python, detecting the movement of its smaller prey fleeing, prepared to give a chase. Mason intercepted, landing a powerful blow that drove the snake backward. The reptile hissed in rage, its full attention now on the man who had denied it an easy meal. For long minutes, Mason kept the python at bay, allowing Max to lead Emma to safety. The dance between man and snake was primal, dangerous, a contest of reflexes and will. When Mason was certain the child was beyond immediate danger, he began his own strategic retreat, never turning his back on the massive predator. 20 yards, 15-10. At 5 yards from where Max and Emma waited, the python suddenly surged forward with explosive speed. Mason deflected the strike, but the snake's powerful body whipped around, knocking him off balance. He fell backward, the python seizing advantage, lunging for his exposed arm. Max released Emma's sleeve and launched himself at the snake, his powerful jaws clamping down on the python's neck just behind its head. The snake thrashed violently, its massive coils threatening to crush the shepherd's ribs. "Max, release!" Mason shouted, regaining his footing. The dodge immediately let go and darted away, but not before the python's fangs grazed his holder, drawing blood. The momentary distraction was enough. Mason landed a decisive blow to the snake's head, disorienting it long enough for him to scoop up the terrified child and retreat to safer ground, Max limping slightly at his side. 50 yards deeper into the forest, in a small clearing well beyond the python's territory, Mason finally stopped to assess his companions. The little girl trembled uncontrollably, shock setting in. Max licked at the wound on his holder, a puncture that worried Mason more than he let show. "You're Safino," Mason assured the child, setting her gently on a fallen log. "I'm Mason. That brave fellow is Max. What's your name, little one?" Emma, she whispered, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. "Emma Pierce." "Where are your parents, Emma? How did you get out here alone?" The child's bottom lip quivered. "Daddy brought me. He said we were going camping." But then her voice broke, the trauma too fresh to articulate. Mason knelt before her, keeping his voice gentle despite the anger rising in his chest. "Your daddy left you here alone?" Emma nodded, a sob escaping her. "He pushed me when the big snake came, then he ran away." Her small hands clutched at Max's fur, seeking comfort. He said, "I was in the way." A cold fury settled in Mason's gut, the kind he hadn't felt since leaving the battlefield. What kind of monster would abandon a child to such a fate? The question must have shown on his face because Emma shrank back slightly. "I'm not angry at you, little one," Mason quickly assured her. "You've been very brave." "Max thinks so." At the mention of his name, the shepherd wed softly, nudging Emma's hand with his nose. The gesture seemed to comfort her. Mason turned his attention to Max's wound. The puncture wasn't deep, but python bites, while not venomous, in the traditional sense, carried bacteria that could cause dangerous infections. And this particular python was Sumpfingles, one of the invasive Burmese specimens that had established themselves in these parts after being released by irresponsible, exotic pet owners. Some of them had bred with local snakes, creating hybrids with unpredictable characteristics. "We need to clean that wound, Buddy," Mason murmured, examining the puncture more closely. Max stood patiently, though his breathing had become slightly labored. A distant roll of thunder punctuated Mason's concern. The approaching storm would make traveling difficult, but they couldn't stay in Theopan. They needed shelter, medical supplies, and time to figure out what to do about the abandoned child. "Emma, we need to go to my cabin. It's not far, and there's a storm coming. Can you walk a little more?" The girl nodded bravely, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "Is Max hurt bad?" "He's tough," Mason assured her, though worry gnawed at him. "But we need to help him soon." As they began walking, Max suddenly stiffened, his ears pricking forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Mason whispered, instantly alert, the shepherd's gaze fixed on a point through the trees. Mason followed his line of sight and caught a glimpse of movement, human figures moving through the forest. Approximately 70 yards away, down, Mason instructed, pulling Emma into a crouch behind a thicket of mountain laurel. Max pressed against them, his posture protective despite his injury. Through gaps in the foliage, Mason could make out 3 men. One, dressed in expensive outdoor gear that had clearly never seen actual outdoor use, he recognized immediately as Richard Pierce. The resemblance to Emma wasn't mistaken. The other 2 were clearly hired help. One carried what looked like a hunting rifle, though hunting was prohibited in this section of the forest. "We need to be thorough," Pice was saying, his voice carrying in the still air. "If somehow survived, this becomes a kidnapping rather than a tragic accident." "The snake would have finished her by now," the armed man replied. "These pythons don't mess around." "I'm not paying you for assumptions," Pice snapped. "I want visual confirmation." Mason felt Emma trembling against him and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Max, despite his injury, remained vigilant, his eyes tracking the men's movements. "What if we find her alive?" asked the third man, whose weathered face and practiced movements marked him as someone familiar with Fefrest. "What then?" A heavy silence followed the question. "Nature is full of accidents," Pierce finally answered, his tone chilling in its casualness. "Make it look convincing." The cold calculation in those words confirmed what Mason had already suspected. This was no abandonment in a moment off wakeness. This was attempted murder meticulously planned. Mason's military training kicked in, assessing their options with tactical precision. Direct confrontation was too risky. With Emma present and Max injured, they needed to reach his cabin where he had medical supplies for Max and means to protect the child. "We're going to play a quiet game," Mason whispered to Emma. "Like hide-and-seek. We need to move very silently through the forest. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide with renewed fear. "Is that my daddy looking for me?" "Yes," Mason answered honestly, "but he won't find you. Max and I will make sure of that." As the search party moved deeper into the python's territory, Mason guided Emma in the opposite direction, taking advantage of the natural cover provided by the dense understory. Max moved with them, his training overriding his pain as he maintained his protective position beside Emma. The first fat raindrops began to fall as they reached the edge of a small stream. The water would help mask their scent trail. But crossing meant exposure. Mason scanned both directions, then made his decision. "I'm going to carry you across," he told Emma. "Then we'll move quickly to my cabin. It's just beyond those big oak trees." As Mason lifted Emma, he noticed Max's condition had deteriorated. The shepherd's breathing had become more labored, and a slight tremor ran through his powerful frame. Whatever was in that snake's bite was working faster than Mason had anticipated. "Hang on, buddy," Mason murmured. "Just a little further." They crossed the stream and covered the remaining distance to Mason's cabin in tense silence, the sounds of their passage masked by the increasingly heavy rainfall. The modest structure came into view. A sturdy log cabin nestled against a hillside, partially concealed by the surrounding forest. Once inside, Mason quickly secured the door and moved to the window, watching for any sign of pursuit. The rain was falling in earnest now, a blessing. That will make tracking them more difficult. "Is this your house?" Emma asked, looking around the simple one-room cabin with its handmade furniture and wood stove. "It is," Mason confirmed, turning his attention to Max. The shepherd had collapsed onto a braided rug before the stove, his injured shoulder visibly swollen. "Emma, can you be my helper?" "I need to take care of Max." The child nodded solemnly, eager for a purpose amidst the chaos. "What should I do?" "There's a blue box on that shelf. Can you bring it to me?" Carefully. "It's a bit heavy." While Emma fetched the first aid kit, Mason examined Max more thoroughly. The puncture wound wasn't especially deep, but the skin around it had turned an angry red with dark streaks beginning to extend outward. Signs of a rapidly spreading infection. "You're a brave dog," Emma told Max, kneeling beside him and stroking his head. "You saved me from the monster snake." Max's tail thumped weakly against the floor, his loyal eyes never leaving Emma despite his pain. Mason opened the medical kit, a comprehensive quickly gathered during his years as a medic in the Rangers. Among the supplies was a vial of broad-spectrum menton, a precaution he'd acquired after first encountering the invasive pythons in the forest. The hybrid snakes sometimes exhibited unusual toxins, making the antivenom a necessary safeguard. "This will help him," Mason explained to Emma as he prepared a syringe. "It fights the bad stuff from the snake's bite." "Will it hurt him?" Emma asked worriedly. "Just a little pinch," Mason assured her, "but it will make him feel much better soon." As Mason administered the injection, his men raced through their limited options. Richard Pierce would not give up easily. When the snake failed to eliminate his daughter, he had resorted to hunting her down himself. The storm would buy them time, but eventually Pierce would expand his search. They needed help, legitimate help, from authorities who could protect Emma. But how to contact them from this remote location, especially with Pierce's resources and connections? The cabin had no phone, no electricity. Mason's chosen isolation, once a sanctuary, now complicated their survival. The nearest ranger station was 15 miles away, too far to reach quickly, especially with an injured dog and a traumatized 5-year-old. "Emma," Mason said gently, "I need to ask you some questions about your daddy to help understand what's happening." The child's face clouded, but she nodded bravely. "Did your daddy say anything to you before he left you with the snake?" Emma's bottom lip trembled. "He said I was making his life too complicated, that Victoria didn't want a child around." Her small voice broke. "He said sometimes accidents happen in Thefrest." "Who is Victoria?" "Daddy's girlfriend." "She doesn't like me." "Shed daddy, I'm a burden." Mason felt his jaw tighten. The pieces were falling into place. A man willing to murder his own child to please a new partner. The depravity was staggering. "Where does your daddy think you live? Who takes care of you?" "I live with Grandma, Grace," Emma explained. "Daddy only visits sometimes. Grandma just got me Max, but Daddy didn't like him." A flicker of recognition sparked in Mason's mind. "Max, your grandmother got you this dog?" He looked at the shepherd, who, despite his weakened state, remained attentive to their conversation. Emma nodded. "Just yesterday, Grandma said he was a rescue dog. He knew me right away." She leaned close to Max, whispering, "He smells like mommy." The coincidence was too specific to ignore. A trained rescue dog recently adopted showed immediate affinity for this particular child. The puzzle was missing pieces, but Mason sensed connections forming. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rolled across the mountains. The weather would keep Pierce and his men at bay temporarily, but it also isolated Mason, Emma, and Max more completely. Max wed softly, trying to rise despite his weakness. Mason gently pressed him back down. "Rest, buddy. The medicine needs time to work." But the shepherd was insistent, his gaze fixed on the cabin's rear window, his ears prick forward, body tense despite his illness. "Someone's out there," Mason whispered, reaching for the hunting knife he kept by his bedside. "Emma, stay down by Max." Moving silently to the window, Mason peered through the rain-streaked glass. At first, he saw nothing but the gray curtain of the downpour and the darkening forest beyond. Then a movement, a figure emerging from trees, moving deliberately toward the cabin. Not Pierce or his hired men. This was someone else moving with the confident familiarity of a person who knew the forest well. A tall man in weathered outdoor gear, his face partially obscured by a rain hat. "Who is that?" Emma whispered, peering cautiously from her position beside Max. Mason shook his head, knife ready. "Stay back." 3 firm knocks sounded on the cabin door. Max surprisingly relaxed slightly, though he remained alert. "Mason Carter," a deep voice called. "My name is John Reynolds. I'm a forest guide from Oakridge. Grace Sullivan sent me to find her granddaughter." Mason peered through a narrow gap in the curtains, studying the stranger claiming to be John Reynolds. The man stood patiently in the downpour, his weathered face open and nonchalant. There was something about his stance, a forest's ease, hands visible, body language non-threatening, that spoke of honesty. "How did you find this place?" Mason called through the door, keeping Emma behind him. "Nobody knows about my cabin, Grace." "Sullivan showed me a map," Reynolds replied. "And your dog's tracks weren't completely washed away. I've been tracking animals in these mountains for 30 years. At the mention of Grace, Max's ears perked up despite his weakened state. The shepherd attempted to rise, then sank back down with a whine. "He knows the name," Emma whispered, her small hand buried in Max's fur. "Max likes Grandma Grace." Mason hesitated, weighing their limited options. If Reynolds was truly sent by Emma's grandmother, he could be their best chance for help. If he was working with Richard Pierce, opening the door meant disaster. "Proveo no Grace Sullivan," Mason demanded. Reynolds didn't hesitate. "She makes blueberry pancakes every Saturday morning, uses the same cast iron skillet her mother used, has a collection of wind chimes on her back porch that plays when the breeze comes up from the valley, and she just adopted that German shepherd for Emma yesterday." The details were specific, personal, the kind no stranger could fabricate convincingly. Mason unbolted the door, knife still ready at his side. "Come in quickly. We're being hunted." Reynolds stepped inside, water streaming from his rain gear. His eyes immediately found Emma, relief washing over his face. "Thank God," he breathed. "Your grandmother's word sick about you, little one." Emma edged forward cautiously. "You know my grandma." "Since before you were born," Reynolds confirmed, kneeling to her level. "Your mother used to help me with forest conservation projects when she was in high school." At the mention of Emma's mother, Max raised his head, another whine escaping him. Reynolds noticed the dog's condition immediately. "What happened to him?" "Python bite," Mason explained, securing the door. "I've administered antivenom on, but he's not out of danger. The snake was one of those Burmese hybrids." Reynolds whistled low. "Those monsters shouldn't even be in these forests. Irresponsible, exotic pet owners." He moved closer to examine Max. "May I?" "I've had some experience with snake bites." Mason nodded, watching carefully as Reynolds gently probed the swollen area around the puncture wound. The Forsku's experienced hands moved with confident precision. "The antivenenon is shelping, but he needs antibiotics," Reynolds concluded. "I have some in my pack for emergencies." He reached into his waterproof backpack and produced a small medical kit. "Military grade," he explained, noting Mason's raised eyebrow. "I was a medic in desert storm before becoming a guide." While Reynolds tended to Max, Mason pulled Emma aside. "I need to ask you something important, little one. Have you ever seen that man before today?" Emma studied Reynolds thoughtfully, then shook her head. "But he talks like he knows Grandma and Max isn't scared of him." The shepherd's behavior was indeed telling. Despite his protective instincts toward Emma, Max showed no aggression toward Reynolds, a sharp contrast to his reaction to Richard Pierce and his men. "Tell me what happened out there," Reynolds said quietly as he finished bandaging Max's shoulder. "Grace was frantic when she called me. Said her granddaughter was in danger from her own father." Mason recounted the scene he'd witnessed. The abandoned child, the python, Pierce's return with armed men to ensure the job was finished. With each detail, Reynolds' expression darkened. "I've known Richard Pierce for years," the guide revealed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Everyone in Oak Ridge thinks he's this big success story. Local boy makes good in city. But there were always rumors, incidents when he was younger." "What kind of incidents?" Mason asked. Reynolds hesitated, glancing at Emma, who had curled up beside Max and appeared to be dozing, exhausted by trauma. "Cruelty," Reynolds said simply. "Animals disappeared around the Pierce property. A neighbor's dog was found poisoned. Nothing could ever be proven, but those of us who grew up with him knew." Thunder cracked overhead, rattling the cabin windows. The storm had intensified, sheets of rain now whipping horizontally through the forest. "We need to get Emma to safety," Mason said. "Pierce is out there with armed men, and they're not looking to reunite a father with his daughter." Reynolds nodded grimly. "My truck is hidden about a mile north. If we can reach it, I can get you all to Grace's place." "A mile through this?" Mason gestured toward the window with a wounded dog and a 5-year-old. "Got a better option? Pierce is going tow circle back to this area eventually. These woods aren't that big." Mason knew Reynolds was right. They couldn't remain in the cabin indefinitely. Pierce's resources far outmatched their own, and Max needed proper veterinary care. A sudden realization struck Mason. "Wait, you said you've known Pierce for years? From Oak Ridge?" Reynolds nodded. "Born and raised there. Same as him. Different sides of the tracks, though. His family had money. Mine didn't." "Pierce." Mason repeated the name, a distant memory stirring. Richard Pierce, son of William Pierce. Something in Mason's tone made Reynolds look at him more closely. "That's right. Old Bill Pierce owned half the businesses in Oak Ridge. Before he died, left everything to Richard about 10 years ago." "You know the family?" Mason's jaw tightened. "You could say that." Before Reynolds could press further, Max suddenly lifted his head, a low growl building in his throat. Both men instantly fell silent, listening. Through the drumming of rain on the roof, they could hear it. Voices still distant but approaching. "They found our trail," Mason whispered, moving to the window. Through the downpour, he could make out flashlight beams cutting through the gathering darkness. 3 of them, Reynolds confirmed, peering over Mason's shoulder. "We've egged maybe 15 minutes before they reach the cabin." Mason's mind raced through options, each more desperate than the last. The approaching men were armed. A direct confrontation would endanger Emma, Escaping into the storm meant exposure with a wounded dog and a child too small to move quickly through difficult terrain. There's a root cellar, Masson decided, moving to a rug near the back wall. Hidden. Entrance. We can conceal Emma and Max there while we lead Pierce away from the cabin. Reynolds looked doubtful. And if they search thoroughly, they won't find it. I built this place myself. Designed the cellar to be invisible unless you know exactly what to look for. Mason pulled back the rug, revealing what appeared to be solid floorboards. With practiced movements, he pressed a hidden catch, and a section of floor swung upward silently. I've had my reasons for staying hidden over the years. Below, stone steps descended into darkness. Mason retrieved a battery-powered lantern and illuminated a small, but dry space lined with shelves of preserved food and emergency supplies. Emma, Mason said gently, waking the child, I need you to be very brave again. You and Max are going to hide in a secret place while Mr. Reynolds and Em make sure the bad men go away. Emma's eyes widened with fear. Don't leave Melone. Max will be with you, Mason assured her, and we'll be right upstairs, but you must stay absolutely quiet no matter what. You hear? Can you do that? The child looked to Max, who, despite his injury, had managed to stand, ready to accompany her. Emma straightened her small shoulders and nodded. That's my brave girl, Mason said, helping her down the steps. There's water and some crackers on that shelf if you get hungry. We won't be long. Once Emma and Max were safely concealed, Mason replaced the rug and turned to Reynolds. We need to lead them away from here. Make them think we fled east toward the river. Reynolds nodded, checking his own hunting knife. And if they don't follow, then we make sure at least one of us gets back here to protect Emma. As they prepared to leave, Reynolds placed a hand on Mason's arm. You never said how you know the Pierce family. Mason's expression hardened. William Pierce was my father, too. Reynolds' shock was evident. You're Richard's half-brother, Masson confirmed grimly. The one nobody in Oak Ridge knows about. My mother was the housekeeper. When she died, William took me in out of guilt, not love. Raised me alongside Richard until I enlisted at 18. I never knew Bill had another son. That was the point. Richard was the legitimate heir, the golden child. I waste dirty. Secret. Mason checked his knife. When William died, the will was mysteriously altered. Everything went to Richard. Nothing to me. The cabin, this small plot of forest was all I managed to keep. Understanding dawned on Reynolds' face. So when you rescued Emma, I had no idea who. She was, Mason said, just a child in danger. But when I heard the name Pierce, he left the thought unfinished. Reynolds pressed this revelation as the voices outside grew louder. Richard might recognize you. It's been 20 years, and the last time he saw me, I didn't thave this. Mason gestured to the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from his military service. They moved to the door, ready to execute their desperate plan. One more thing, Mason said quietly. If neither of us makes it back, there's a two-way radio in the cellar. Emergency frequency is marked. Emma can reach Thuringer's station with it. Reynolds nodded solemnly. Both men understood the stakes. Outside, the storm had transformed the forest into a chaotic blur of wind and water. They slipped away from the cabin's rear exit, deliberately leaving tracks heading eastward, obvious enough to be discovered, but not so obvious as to appear intentional. They had covered perhaps 50 yards when shouting carried through the storm. Pierce's men had found the cabin. Mason and Reynolds crouched behind a fallen oak, watching as the three figures converged on the small structure. Richard Pierce stood back while his two hired men approached the door, weapons ready. That's him, Mason whispered, his first glimpse of his half-brother in 2 decades. And that's no ordinary hired help with him. The one with Theraful has military training. Watch his movement pattern. Reynolds nodded. The other one's local. Jed Maddox, bad news. Poacher, sometimes guide for rich hunters wanting illegal trophies. The armed professional kicked in the cabin door while Maddox covered him. They disappeared. Inside, leaving Richard waiting in the rain, his expensive voodoo gear already soaked through. Minutes stretched like hours as Mason and Reynolds waited, hardly daring to breathe. Finally, the hired men re-emerged. Nothing, the professional upped. But they were here, coffee still warm on the stove. They've gone far. Not with a child and a wounded dog, Richard insisted, his voice carrying despite the storm. Find them. There's tracks heading east, Maddox pointed out. Toward the river. Then what are you waiting for? Richard snapped. An invitation. Find my daughter. The cold calculation in his voice sent a chill through Mason that had nothing to do with the rain soaking through his clothes. This was the voice of a man who had arranged his own daughter's death without hesitation. The three men moved off in the direction off the Falls Trail, passing within 20 feet of Mason and Reynolds' hiding place. As Richard passed, illuminated briefly by his companion's flashlight, Mason got his first clear look at his half-brother's face in 20 years. The resemblance was unmistakable, the same pierced jawline, the same calculating eyes their father had possessed. But where William's face had eventually softened with age and regret, Richard's had only hardened, ambition and cruelty etched into every line. Once Pierce and his men had moved beyond earshot, Mason and Reynolds carefully backtracked toward the cabin. I always wondered what happened to William's other son, Reynolds said quietly as they moved. There were rumors years back, but nothing concrete. Old Mrs. Tillman, who used to help with the cleaning, sometimes mentioned the other boy, but most. Folks thought she was confused. She wasn't, Mason replied.